You are about to listen to a discussion on how to actually live out your faith in Christ, living it out loud within our messy and busy lives. The content of this discussion comes from our Wednesday night crew, pastoral preaching notes, and the live small group discussions these notes prompted, something we like to call a community-based learning experience. Come now, chew on this with us.
Has someone ever shared their Jesus story or testimony with you? Who they were before meeting Jesus and sharing the transformation that he's made in their life, and you were like, what? I never would have guessed that about your past. Well, that's what we're experiencing today as we talk about the Apostle Matthew. This is Pastor Robin Bjornson, and you've probably figured out I'm not Pastor Orleen Hasseltine, although she is here with us today. Very excited about that. And Steve Otto Lundy, our shekel keeper, and that will make more sense later, and our producer, Bruce Nelson. Thank you for joining us for this week's discussion on Chew on This. This week's topic, Who are the Apostles? Introducing Matthew, the former tax collector. And this was discussed on Wednesday night, October 14th. I want to encourage you, all of the sermon notes, they're really raw discussion notes, and handouts are available at realchurch.org/Wednesday night. So please check those out. Also, I do want to let you know, we have rolled out probably the coolest app in all the land, I think anyway, for Maranatha Church. I want to encourage you to check that out as well, and get all of the notifications about the things that are happening around here. If you just search Maranatha Forest Lake on whatever search engine you use for apps, that will come up. So have a great time exploring that. So for today's discussion, we're talking about Matthew. And I have to admit, as I was going through this, it was really cool because, you know, I mean, how many times have we read Matthew and heard about him and breezed through that book? And I mean, it's a big book and there's a whole lot in there. And I didn't honestly ever really think a whole lot about Matthew himself. And so this deep dive was a boatload of fun for me as we are exploring who all the apostles are. So by way of reminder, I do want to encourage you, though, for all of the notes about stuff that we're about to talk about, please check out all the previous episodes and all of their handouts, because all of that is really listed well on there for you. So I'm going to go over them rather quickly. How do you get to be an apostle? Okay, 3 things. Those who had witnessed the resurrected Christ, those who were a title that you could just tack on to yourself. So here we have this group of men that started out as followers, that went to disciples, that went to apostles. Thanks, Pastor O. Total mind blank. And one of the interesting things about the apostles is throughout the course of time, depending upon, you know, maybe what the focus was in their lives or even maybe how they passed away, they have images associated with who they are. And it was one of those vehicles of communication that the church used to help educate people who love Jesus before language, written language, was really communicated that way. And so if you couldn't read, you could learn all about theology through the different symbols that were in the Christian art at the time. And so that's where we see a number of these with all of the apostles. And for Matthew in particular, his was a halberd. And you'll be seeing a picture of that. I wouldn't want to die with that, but
well, it helps when we see these pictures. I'm glad that you're encouraging us to do this, because hunting for them has been quite interesting, because sometimes the word used for it is
Right.
not exactly what comes up on the Google search. But this image right here, when you see it, it looks ancient and scary. It looks like a tool of war that you made
Right.
sure you had on your back besides what else you had in your hand. So it is Going through the notes, I had a gasp inside myself. It's like, yep, this would be not just a tool of war, but this would be a way to make sure somebody is dead.
Yeah.
Yep.
And as awful as that is to think about, I think about two things. It reminds me that our family, and this is just our distant family. I mean, loving Jesus, these are our people. Our people have faced really, really difficult things. I don't have anywhere to put my head around that. I do know in the depth of my soul, Jesus is worth it.
Yes.
Whatever price,
Amen.
Jesus is worth it. So that's the first thing. But the other thing is we're coming up, November 1st is actually the International Day of Prayer for the Persecuted Church. And so mark that day on your calendar. And if you are unfamiliar with that, please check them out on the web, because this organization started, a ton of years ago by Richard Wurmbrand, really drawing attention to those who have come before us in the faith and the price that they have paid with their lives, their families, their livelihood, all of it, to love Jesus and to share his message. So, it's hard to look at, but it's good for us to know that this price has been paid and to honor that. So yeah, Matthew and the halberd. So we talked about apostles. We talked about their images that go with them. The other thing that we've been going through, too, is recognizing the patronage system. And I was really grateful for Pastor Orlean to begin unpacking this for us, because it's not necessarily something that we use in common thought here in the West so much, although there are parts of this that are in the scenes. I think about Patreon, for example. You may be familiar with that. But, in the patron system, see these things in all kinds of places as I'm going through my daily devotions. So it's been really cool about that. But that is what helps make sense to these three different groupings we find real consistent in the scriptures. So the first triad, Andrew, Peter, James, John. The second triad, Nathaniel or Bartholomew, same guy. Philip, Thomas, Matthew, his other name is Levi. We'll talk a little bit more about that. And then in the third triad, there was James Bar Alphaeus, Thaddeus, with a number of different names, Simon the Zealot, and Judas Iscariot. And it was a ranking system, and there wasn't anything necessarily lesser about that. It was just this different level of access, really, and intimacy and education and all of that. So, yeah, fascinating stuff. So today we're going to be focusing on Matthew, as we mentioned, and I wanted to start out with Matthew 9 through 11. So if you'll read along with me. As Jesus passed on from there, did not come to call the righteous, but sinners to repentance. So there is a whole lot that happens in that segment of Scripture.
Yes.
So much. And so as we read over it, it totally boggles my mind. So here's Jesus, and he specifically goes to the tax office, specifically to see Matthew. this wasn't like I've got a list of stuff to do. I'm going to stop by the Walmart today. If I get to it, if I don't get to it, I've got a list of errands I need to run. It wasn't. Jesus was intentional, and he went to see Matthew. He said 2 words to Matthew: follow me. And there we don't have any indication of question or clarification. The dude got up and followed him, which just blows me away. So we can talk a little bit more about that. But then it goes on in just the next sentence. Now it happened as Jesus sat at the table in the house. So we have this example of instant obedience.
Yes.
Way to go, Matthew. Lord, help me with that. And then what does Matthew do? His first response is, I want to have a big party. A big party. And I invite all my sinner friends. And Jesus, I want you to meet my sinner friends. Come on. And so here's all of these people that, according to the Pharisees, were like, why are you inviting these people to your house?
Yes.
But I love Matthew's heart that what I have, I want you to have. That
Yes.
generosity and sharing. And hidden in here is the fact that Matthew had enough money to have a house and a table for all these people to sit at. So that's a clue that tells us a little bit more about him. But he also had enough wealth to provide all of the food for that big clan. So really interesting. But, so we go over it and we say, so Matthew, the tax collector, what exactly does that mean?
Yes.
Life starts getting a little more interesting. So,
Well, you mentioned, Pastor Robin, that there may have been some type of Jesus comes and say, follow me. Mm-hmm. There was a relationship there already. There was a thing. So there had to be this, in my imagination, Jesus, because we see it being shown to Matthew's friends, that Jesus gave dignity to Matthew, even though he was an outcast of society, which is a huge piece of every society. Those who are labeled less than get treated that way. Unfortunately, we see that with the homeless or the mentally ill in our society. People kind of back away like you're going to, catch being homeless, or you're going to catch a mental illness when it's really flaring, and you can tell when they're out in public that they're having a hard time. Instead of doing the opposite, like what I would see Jesus doing, stepping towards and saying, what is your need right now? What can I do to help you? Mm-hmm. And I think in my head, Jesus had made those because Matthew was, as we're going to find out, was not somebody everybody would approach and walk down the sidewalk with. So I wonder how many of those instances happened before the follow me. So I was looking at your almost 100 pages of notes, Pastor Robin. It's not just me, Otto. I tell you, yeah, Mr. Nelson, look at it. It's just you start finding info and you start throwing it in the packet, and it's like, oh, this is amazing. Oh, they're going to find this interesting. And it really is. But I'm wondering just how many touches. I mean, if you see it in a mathematical equation, Jesus did this, and this with Matthew. Mm-hmm. So when he came and said the 2 words, immediately Matthew was ready.
there was a ripeness.
There was, yes.
That was already there.
Yes, yeah.
And because you've laid out for us, these guys knew him. It was their community. And so it wasn't like Jesus just apparated and there he was and, oh, ta-da, and dust fell down from the sky and here I am, and they were swept away in this emotion. No, they knew each other. That was their community, and they'd seen Jesus all around. Exactly like you say, this couldn't have been his first conversation.
I don't know. I've got a different view that
Okay.
everybody knew of Matthew. Doesn't necessarily mean that they knew him. It's like I
Right.
know the tax collector here, the IRS. Doesn't mean I know him, but I know
Right.
of them.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
But he, so Jesus probably knew of him. I'm sure he had to pay taxes at some time. Another, so it was either to him or somebody else in the office. I'm not sure how the office works here, but so now, on the other hand, Matthew, I'm sure, knew of Jesus. Mm-hmm. Oh man, because obviously Jesus saw something in him that good. He saw the good in him, and that's why he went up there. But Matthew didn't know. To me, Matthew didn't know that he's just sitting there and I really shouldn't be doing that and stuff like that. Oh, there's Jesus. And all of a sudden, and this is a public forum because I'm sure the tax
Right.
office is right out in the middle of everything, so
yes.
everybody sees it. And this rabbi comes up specifically to him and says, "Follow me." I'm sure he was just crushed and excited and elated at the same time. So he may not have really known him until that moment. And at that moment, everything just broke loose inside of Matthew, and he was changed, I think, instantly. And that's why he jumped up. And I mean, it's immediately he left the tax office. Well, who's minding the store here?
Right.
Now, was there anybody else there? It's like,
You
here,
just-
got
you
a
just
pile
left your
of
income.
shekels sitting here, and he's taking off, and it's I don't care about that anymore. That's done, and
Right.
that's just kind of the way I kind of, if I was going to make a movie, that's the way I'd see it. Oh, he's coming this way. Well, he's coming right at me. Follow me, yes.
And I wonder,
Yes.
I wonder with all of that, with the baggage that was associated with being a tax collector in their society, you know how today we experience, the joy of ourselves or others coming to Jesus, and that instant transformation, the amazing things that happen in that twinkle of an eye, and yet, how uncomfortable it is to realize, wow, I still have baggage, and Jesus didn't take away all my baggage yet, right? And we have this process of sanctification to go through. And so here's Matthew, and we'll start talking a little bit about what was in his history, and it makes me wonder, with his progressive sanctification, when some of those aha moments came along. When in Matthew's course of time with Jesus, was it while Jesus was around, or was it after Jesus was dead, buried, resurrected, and ascended into heaven, when he got that aha moment of, I am so thoroughly and completely loved, and that's out of his being. So I think that's really a fascinating thing with Matthew's life, because it was complicated. Oh, how complicated, you might ask.
Oh, how complicated.
How complicated.
Well, here,
Was it complicated?
well, here on page 74, it says very complicated.
I deserve that, yeah. So here we understand that Matthew was not in the first triad, but Matthew was in the second triad. Which gave him access that some of the others didn't get. I don't suspect in my imagination that Matthew ever imagined he would have that intimate of access to Jesus. So even being in the second triad was probably a mind blower for him.
Yeah.
I'm thinking.
Yep, I would think so. Yep.
The other thing that I think is really interesting is we're told that his family name, Levi bar Alphaeus, Matthew was also called Levi, so Matthew bar Alphaeus, his brother, probably brother to James the Less, son of Alphaeus, so not James the son of Zebedee, son of thunder, not James, Jesus' half-brother, but James the son of Alphaeus, who is also an apostle, who is in the third triad. So when we find out that Matthew made his living in Capernaum, he was this tax collector, as we mentioned. Here's a little bit about tax collectors to set some of the stage here. They were hated and rejected by society on the whole. This was not a circumstance where parents grew up excited for their kids to be a tax collector. The families, there were some families that even went to the degree of having a funeral for those in their family who became tax collectors.
Wow.
That they are dead to them. They are mourning that, and they have nothing more to do with them. So it was serious. The quote is here, they were as offensive to Jews for the economic and social practices as lepers were for their uncleanness. Both were excluded from the people of God. So when we think of lepers going around going, unclean, unclean, they would also think they didn't do that. They didn't say they did that, but that was the sense that the tax collectors would also be living with this sense of, I am unclean in this community.
Others did it for them by
Exactly.
avoiding walking on the other side of the street. Yep.
Matthew tells us that they were ranked with murderers, robbers, harlots. Also tells us ranked with Gentiles, which you really at that point couldn't have been anything worse.
Yep.
Sinners. Jews were actually allowed, they were permitted to lie to the tax collectors if needed. So they couldn't even count on people in their community being honest with them. So talk about not having solid ground under your feet. We find out, because of what's known about the tax practices of the time, that tax collecting, in how they made their money, they were known as scammers, basically. They inflated prices. They could, they basically were doing a shakedown at the city gates. What's in your wagon and what's under that blanket and what's in your pockets and, all of that. And so people, I could understand, would feel really violated with how the tax collectors of their time treated them. So it's not like in the measure they didn't earn this, I don't want to have anything to do with you. And on top of that, they were serving the occupying force. So here's the Roman culture being the occupier, and these people are traitors to their own people, so to speak, by serving them. So that provoked the question in me of what in the world was going on in Matthew's mind that made becoming a tax collector the thing that he decided he needed to do.
Good question. Yeah, engage imagination, wondering if there was a financial need.
Right.
And he figured this is the quickest way to take care of the family, wondering if his income did go towards the family or if it was he left and it was all for him, if he had that kind of rebellious, which was hard to have in that day and time. Was he considered a quote-unquote sacrificial lamb? Seeing that his brother, his supposed brother James the Less, was in the second triad, was that part of that family was considered at that level in the society? They were kind of on the serving class per se. And did he make this decision to help better them, realizing I'm cut off from my family? Was there dignity in the background or was there rebellion?
Right.
I mean, easily could go one way or the other.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
But what a change, because nothing. I mean, you talk about I am here, now I am totally cut off from all of that. Now I'm over here.
Wonder how
180.
old he was.
Good question, too, yep.
He was a young guy and unemployment's high. Well, maybe this is all that's left.
Unemployment's just everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes.
Do I want to eat?
And did he have because they just didn't put him there. There is an aptitude. I mean, the Roman culture was so very organized. Where did that start? Who recruited Matthew? Where did they start seeing he had an ability for this? Was their family well connected? Did they figured they scored one because they got one of these guys to help them to see?
Yeah, and I wonder, as a kid, was Matthew on the outs? So being excluded was normal for him? Was he accustomed to being rejected? Or was he just this happy-go-lucky, normal kid of the time, and then these desperate circumstances came around, made these choices for whatever reason, and then all of a sudden started dealing with the rejection? And was that a new entrance in his world?
Well, looking and reading through your notes, when he's writing the Gospel of Matthew, when that came, it doesn't appear to me that he quickly studied so he could write that he knew. He embraced the training when he was younger and what he knew of the Old Testament and what he knew of his culture and Judaism and all of that because of what he wrote. So as a child, that was all given. He was part of the class. He was part of being trained and taught and being part of the culture and going to the synagogue and all of those types of things were part of his life. So there had to be a rift somewhere from the teenage rebellious years. I don't know. But there was a lot invested in him before he made that decision to live in a totally leprosized culture to the rest of his family.
And because one of the questions I had walking through this material is, okay, wait a minute, his brother's in this group too. Were they even talking before this? In all of the stuff that was going on, did Jesus actually reconcile their family together?
Well, yeah. I'm wondering if James the Less told Jesus about Matthew or I mean, they're also interwoven, which I didn't realize until we started this study, just how close and accessible. We knew that they didn't live, other side of the world from each other, that they did live near. But I have to wonder, did Jesus notice Matthew first, or did he notice James the Less first? Because we see everybody going, it appears, they go, oh, you have to come meet this Jesus, this Messiah.
Right.
So where did James do that for his brother?
Or was Matthew a decent guy that saw how bad tax collectors were and decided to go in that field and maybe be honorable and only tax what's supposed to be there? But then again, maybe that's not so good because he obviously had a lot of money there.
I was going to say, he got rich somehow, right?
Yes, well, and those were his friends.
Well, he was only a little scammy.
Yeah,
little shakedown.
5%. 5%. Yeah. He didn't go for the 15 or 25. And those were his people. It's not like he went and got that he picked this group. That was it. He wasn't allowed. Once he made the decision, that's with all your studying, right? Once he made the decision, he was not allowed to be part of his family.
Right.
He was dead. They had the funeral for him.
Right. We in the study, I found this really interesting. They had there were two different kinds of tax collectors, the Gabay and the Mox.
I was waiting for you to pronounce those as I'm reading through the notes. How in the world? I'm not going to go look for the pronunciation.
Oh, I totally did. You know I did.
Pastor Robin was going to have it. Yeah.
I totally
Say it one
did.
more time. The what and the what?
The Gabay
The Gabay.
and the Mox.
Mox.
The Gabay and the Mox.
That's going to be fun.
The Gabay were the general tax collectors. They were thinking that this was Zacchaeus. No, I got that wrong. I'm sorry. The Gabay. They were the general tax collectors. They assessed local things, property tax, income tax, poll tax. The Mox were, they collected duty on imports, exports. This is the thing at the gate thing. Goods for domestic trade, anything that moved by road. They were the ones that sets the tolls on the roads and the bridges. They taxed your beasts of burden, the number of axles on your wagons. We kind of do that now.
yeah,
I have an RV, and so they want to know,
so I was gonna
right?
say 3 axes.
They charged for tariff on parcels and letters, and really any way they could be creative to put a tax on something. The Mox did. It says their assessments were often arbitrary and capricious. So you can see in this, I'm thinking, well, if they were arbitrary and capricious, people feel that, and they feel shakedown. They feel I can't count on going to the tax office and knowing I'm going to pay 4 shekels for something. I might get there and it's 15. I mean, you just never knew where the stake in the sand was with these people. What I did find out is that there were 2 kind of Mox, the Great Mox and the Little Mox. It feels like I'm describing a mountain range, right? The Great Mox and the Little Mox. This is where we get into Zacchaeus, because they think that Zacchaeus was a Great Mox. They stay behind the scenes. They tend to be the employers and have other people working for them and collecting taxes for them. Whereas the Little Mox, Matthew was a Little Mox because he was the guy who manned the local tax office where he was dealing face-to-face with people. And so his position in particular was the most hated position.
Random question. I don't recall reading this in the notes. Jesus' interaction with Zacchaeus, is this before? I'm assuming it's after the calling of the disciples, because that seems to be, but I'm wondering where Zacchaeus lands.
I know. It says Luke 19, but again, I don't know.
Well, then
in the timeline.
that would put Zacchaeus probably after this experience with Matthew. I wonder if Zacchaeus was Matthew's boss.
I wonder.
Was he at the party?
Ooh.
Good question. Maybe Zacchaeus footed the bill for the party.
Wow. Hadn't thought about that. Relationship, though.
Oh,
I mean,
yes.
all these different tendrils in different places, we learned from this community that they were really connected, you know? So as I was going through this material, the question that lodged in my heart that we started small group with was this. Who's the tax collector today? So who among us today do we not want to have anything to do with? Who would we cross the street to stay away from? You know, who would we consider dirty or unclean or lesser or rejected even? So there were a lot of interesting comments about that. Steve, do you recall any coming up?
Well, all I can say is the IRS has been like a father to me.
Oh, that's funny.
Oh, that sounds good.
But,
I missed
mean,
something there.
it really isn't that much different today. I mean, you really are taxed. There's a fee, a permit, or something on almost everything we do. I mean, it drives me crazy that you buy a brand new car, you pay sales tax on it, and it's 7.5%, whatever it is. 2 years later, you sell it, and that person's got to pay sales tax on it. Then 2 years later, after that, they got to. How many times does the same vehicle get taxed?
Yes.
Isn't
that interesting?
Sorry to get got off.
No,
there
no,
a little
no.
bit. I mean,
but it's the
so
same thing. It's the same
Yeah.
culture. Of
Correct. Yes.
How much money can they actually? And now in our culture, we don't have a face assigned to it. But then they had the face at the gate, which was Matthew.
Right.
Yeah.
You brought up a couple when we were beginning. What do we do with those with mental health? What do we do?
Homeless. Yeah. That you will go around them.
Yeah, we had some fascinating conversation. I actually posed this to my adult boys before the night came up. And I said, so this is what we're studying. Who do you think this is? And they said, police officers. In today's environment, with the tension that's going on, there are those who are rejecting them today. I thought, wow, interesting. They also brought up sex workers. That would make sense. We have a wonderful ministry here at Maranatha that engages in the front lines of that. And loving on purpose, those that society doesn't want to embrace or acknowledge with dignity. So
Yeah. Does not want to acknowledge with dignity. It's so hard. And yes, I realize how old I am to think anyone would consider a police officer as someone that
Right.
you would walk the other way. I understand how some have gotten to that position, but we also are really blessed here where we get an opportunity to have relationship with people in that keep our society safe. All those
Yep.
different types of callings and different types of jobs that we get a chance to interact with our community that way. And it hurts my heart on both things, on
Right.
both sides, that somebody would have fear because that is a safe person, that
Right.
they've had the experience where the one that wasn't safe, or they've heard about that, but they've never had the friendship of the person who keeps them safe, male and female. And then also as the officer, that someone would assume that and make this idea or make, I am not going to talk to you. Because I've seen it happen and I've had to deal with my own insides when it comes to someone who's homeless. I'm in a panic, especially if I'm in a bigger city. It is really hard to navigate. And if I am all by myself, it's really hard to navigate how to treat them with honor. Even if they haven't engaged me, they are still, I don't want to walk by them like they're invisible because that's ridiculous. They're not invisible. They're sitting right there.
Right.
So all of the mess that goes with this. How many times did people walk by Matthew and it's like, I know his parents, but I'm going to pretend he's not there because society says I can.
Right.
It's okay to treat him this way because he isn't doing what we want him to do. Yeah.
Man, we brought up, it came up in conversation, COVID.
Oh, yes.
We're right in the middle of
Yes,
COVID,
yes.
and
Unclean. Yes.
Yeah, people are trying to be careful and all of that, and the visceral reaction we're having, and it reminds me, when my kids were small, and it was so common every year, school year, you would be notified of some circumstance with lice happening, right?
Right.
And you were like, oh no, lice, it means this, until your family gets lice, and then it doesn't mean that. And
Yes.
it's crazy. And walking through that time frame, and I think about it now, and those of us who are either impacted directly or by relationship, or even just the accommodations that we're making now, it's got this distance or separate or whatever component to it. Yeah, so it was really interesting conversation with who would this be today, just acknowledging and recognizing that reaction that could be common to humanity, right? It makes me wonder with Matthew in particular. I mentioned, was he undone being in the second triad? Because here he is having experienced this. We don't know for how long he's experienced this rejection, not acceptance, but he currently is in this particular circumstance. And so here's Jesus, and Jesus invites him in and blesses him with a new life, a future life
Yes.
with him, and everything is different. Have you ever run into people who don't know that you're different now? You're not
yep.
that same person anymore, and it's almost like you can see the sparks flying. They don't quite know what something happened here, but
Right. Yes, that you are not the person I thought you were, or
Right.
wait a minute, you didn't think that was funny, or wait a minute, you didn't take my polite teasing, which is really putting you in your place. You didn't take it this time. You actually told me that's disrespectful. I mean, those types of things where you're treating them as this. It's like, wait a minute, I'm not that person anymore.
Right.
And it has a tendency to happen within family structure, where you have to remind them that either you've grown up, or that you're sober, or that you are help, or that you are no longer involved in that profession, or whatever it is
Right.
that they found so complicated to treat you with dignity. But yes, I found it in a way, because I am in the family structure of 5 kids. I'm the 4th daughter, and then the 5th one is our cute little baby brother. So I was the youngest daughter, and so I was the et cetera around extended cousins. There was a lot of us, extended cousins, this or that. So I got used to not having a voice as a little kid. I didn't need one because everybody told me what to do. But when you discover you need to have a voice because you're a human being, they weren't so like, what? I'm used to being quiet, paying attention, seeing, and then figuring out sometimes you have to say something. They weren't always really, what? You don't need to have an opinion because you just do what you're told. It's like, well, I don't think that works that way anymore.
Right.
So this very verbose, person who likes to talk a lot now, learning that is okay to be. And not everybody enjoyed it or wanted it to be that way, because now they have to deal with you as something different. And that wasn't a big thing like what Matthew had to deal with by
Right.
any means.
Right. Isn't it interesting? There was a phrase that landed in my heart quite a number of years ago, that dealing with disagreement is good for us. And occasionally you run across people in your world, or maybe this happens to yourself, where that person hasn't been given the gift of disagreement often enough for them to get good at dealing with it.
I'm loving that. The gift of disagreement.
The gift of
yes.
disagreement, because if people don't disagree with you, if they don't have a different opinion and share that with you, you never really learn how to navigate that well, so that it comes a win-win for the both of you. And I wonder with Matthew. So here he was engaged in this small group of men, the apostles. Did he feel lesser than? Did he keep waking up every moment going, I really shouldn't be here? If these people knew what a poser I was, they wouldn't let me in this group. And I wonder when that eased in his heart. Just the
You think of how much baggage he had to bring with him compared to the
Yes.
other ones.
Yes. Yep.
James, they were already following, John was John the Baptist and that, but all of a sudden you got this guy who's been a bad guy all the way up until those 2 words,
Right.
follow me.
Yes.
And all of a sudden, did he just immediately that time flush the baggage and he's done with it? Or, like you say, did he carry it with you like the rest of us kind of do here? It's so tough to let her go.
Yeah.
well, and it's and I know Jesus can do this, so I don't want to put limitations on what he can or can't do because I haven't seen it. But what I witness is progression. I see people letting go of stuff, myself included, over the course of time. It's almost like as we become saturated in his presence and in his love, and learn to relax and become safe in it, we let more stuff go. But man, I'm ready for the lightning bolt to happen anytime like that. So a little bit more information for us about Matthew. So Matthew, of course, wrote the Gospel of Matthew, and they think that was about 50 to 65 years after Jesus' death, burial, and resurrection. So there was...
Okay. When that finally connects in your head,
Yeah.
that the tax collector guy that's an outcast writes this, it's like, what? Is it? I mean, oh, that's right. This is the Matthew we're talking about. Did you have that in your research?
Did.
Okay.
I totally did. And what's funny now is like it's happening. So this morning I was in Colossians, and Paul says, "An apostle of Jesus Christ," and I'm like, Paul.
Yes.
So whether it's whomever it is I'm reading, all of a sudden the frame has changed to who is talking to me.
Very cool.
Isn't that fun?
Yes.
So Matthew, it's thought that the book of Matthew was written after the Jerusalem Council in 49, through the time period of Nero's persecution, right, which was horrifying, and after the destruction of the temple, but before John's death. So there's a whole lot in there, but interesting time frame that Matthew captured this material. Of the 4 Gospels, only 2 of them were written by apostles, so men who were actually personally discipled by Jesus. Thus, they were eyewitnesses. The other 2, Mark and Luke, wrote from what they learned through investigation. It was really close investigation with primary sources, but they were not apostles, and they were investigating.
Because Mark was connected with Peter,
Right.
and we can tell because it's all action-oriented.
Yep.
And Luke was connected to, I can't remember this one. Luke was connected with one of them, being a physician, and how he followed through. But he was connected with one of the 12, where they were
interesting.
really close. They think Mark was Peter's letter writer, his secretary per se,
Scribe.
his scribe. So I know Luke wouldn't be that as a physician, but he is connected to someone. So when you're talking
Yeah.
about a primary source, they were in and of and around,
Yeah.
and they were part of this whole process of things. But it is interesting that John we get, because
Yep.
John had that strange relationship with Jesus and was asked to do this later, but Matthew, why the guy that was the big sinner? Why is he
Right.
the one? And what's really funny, though, is he's writing it to who? To the Jewish people.
I know, that part blew me
The
away.
ones that excommunicated him. Hey,
Right.
by the way.
Exactly.
That's where, yes, very exciting.
In your face.
In your face.
You know,
Well,
it had to just be tempered. I'm sure it was in
Yeah.
there. Hey, I know this guy's.
and by then, he's like
Correct.
love. He's full of
Old.
love at this point.
Yes.
So Matthew was the first to be written, and the conjecture is that it served as a teaching manual for the early church.
Now, I found that to be a bit of in conflict with other things that I have learned in school, where they say Mark is the original source. There's Q,
Sure, yeah.
the collection of letters and
Yep.
things that were written down that they were so great as a society at doing, that Mark was first, and then Matthew and Luke drew from that. And you need to go on realchurch.org and look at Pastor Robin's Wednesday night notes for this, because she lists the sources. This is, I think, the first time I have seen somebody speaking in opposition that Matthew was its own original source. So just looking through some of the notes, it's like, that's interesting, because the
Right.
stuff that I have read, they don't quote these. They just haven't. So there's always another voice when it comes to this to see. So seeing that he wrote from his experience, whether it wasn't like he read Mark and then decided to take from Mark and write his own, that he was, according to quite a few of the things that you have in your notes, considered the original source.
Right. Well, and one of the things that was interesting is 42% of Matthew is unique material, not to the other Gospels. The things that Matthew emphasized for us as we read that Jesus was the Messiah, he was the Son of David, he was the King. He emphasized that Jesus fulfilled Old Testament prophecy. He relayed a number of interesting parables, and I thought it was really fascinating that particularly the one about the compassionate employer. For someone to have had money be an issue in their life, it's interesting to hear this story from Matthew, the former tax collector, where Jesus is basically putting his value on what's important and what's holy. So in Matthew 15 through 20, Matthew outlines for us what's holy. So just reading, then Peter answered and said to him, explain this parable to us. And, how cool was it that they could actually ask Jesus to explain something for them?
Yes.
So Jesus said, "Are you also still so understanding? Still without understanding? Do you not yet understand that whatever enters the mouth goes into the stomach and is eliminated? But those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile a man? For out of the heart proceed evil thoughts, murders, adulteries, fornications, thefts, false witness, blasphemies. These are the things which defile a man. But to eat with unwashed hands does not defile a man." And so I found it so refreshing that here's Matthew, and he's capturing this story about what's important. What does Jesus consider, all of this other stuff, those are symptoms of a problem. They're a problem, but they're symptoms of a problem. What's inside is what matters. And so that was a really cool thing.
It will help next time reading through Matthew, looking at through new eyes, the eyes of Matthew and what he's seen and what he brought, what he noticed and how he's seen Jesus minister to those who were considered outcast in the Jewish society. He couldn't help but.
Right.
Because that was so much of his adult experience.
Amen. And one of the other things that we find about Matthew is that he closes up his gospel, Matthew 28, with what's actually important going forward. So here we have what we know as the Great Commission. Matthew 28, 16 through 20. Then the 11 disciples went away into Galilee to the mountain which Jesus had appointed for them. When they saw him, they worshipped them, but some doubted. Then Jesus came and spoke to them, saying, "All authority has been given to me in heaven and on earth. Go, therefore, and make disciples of all the nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit, teaching them to observe all the things that I have commanded you. And lo, I am with you always, even to the end of the age." And so here we find through the course of Matthew what's important, and we find the redefining and the recreation of a life in Jesus. And so not only did he just get recreated, but he was given an incredible mission. And tradition tells us that Matthew then went and preached. He preached in Judea, according to this, after the ascension for 12 to 15 years, and then he went to foreign nations. And so this profoundly changed his life, and he didn't revert back. He didn't go to his own version of fishing.
Right.
Right?
Right.
He didn't go back to the tax office. He just moved forward. And it just makes me wonder, Jesus didn't call a single rabbi.
Correct.
He didn't call a scribe. He didn't call a Pharisee in this whole bunch of rabble guys, right? He didn't call a Sadducee. There were no priests in the group. There were no elites in the group. He called men who were basically theologically trained, as all of the young men were at that time, fishermen, so people acquainted with hard work. He called a tax collector, someone despised in society. He called commoners, what would be considered the lower class. He even called a political activist. And so out of this whole group, I was left with, this thought. And with this, I want to leave with us today. What does it feel like to be included when you're not used to being included? To being accepted when you're used to rejection? But for me personally, so what triggers an unacceptable or a lesser response in me toward others? Is it their appearance? Is it their social status? Is it their speech? Is it their manner? Is it their intelligence? Who am I discounting? Beyond that, what causes me to feel shame? Matthew shows us hope, acceptance, peace, worth, value, a future, and a future not defined by the mistakes of our past, but of Jesus. So I want to encourage you, ask yourself those questions today. Steve?
Thank you for joining us for this week's discussion on Who Are the Apostles? Today, Matthew, the former tax collector. To enjoy this process live, come join us and the Wednesday night crew every Wednesday evening at 6:30 at Maranatha's Forest Lake campus. This is Steve Lundy reminding you to always be kind.